today's video, I am excited to be making another Reddit Scary Stories video. And for today's theme, I believe I've done it before. It is no sleep, no sleep, no sleep, no sleep, no sleep. And let me pull it up here on my phone. It says, if I haven't read it already, or even if I have, no sleep is a place for Redditors to share their scary personal experiences. So whether these are true or not, whether you believe they're true or not, it might be easier to believe they're not real. And these ones that I have picked, I don't really get too scared when I'm reading things like this or like scary movies or anything like that. So I wouldn't say it really scared me per se, but it definitely, these stories that I picked for today left me with a kind of creepy, eerie feeling. So I'm excited to read them out to you all today, and I will get right into it and get to ASMRing. Okay, so this first story, it is by No Light to See, and it is titled, My Wife Received an Invitation to a Store Opening. I don't think I'll ever see her again. And all of these ones I picked are pretty long, so it will be a long video. I'll probably only be able to do like 3 of them, maybe 4, because they are very long, so. Okay, and it starts. Darren, did you know they opened a Target in Owingsville? My wife Deborah asked me excitedly. Grab the car keys and let's go check it out. I rolled my eyes. It was almost 6 in the evening and I had a long day at work. The prospect of an hour's drive there, 2 hours of shopping, and an hour's drive home wasn't appealing. They didn't open a dang Target in Owingsville, I replied curtly. Only about 2,000 people live there. Why in the heck would a multi-billion-dollar corporation open a store in the middle of the sticks in a town that isn't big enough to support a McDonald's? Squealing wood on tile penetrated my ears as she pushed the bar stool away from the kitchen counter. Her footfalls approaching my chair were heavy like a pouting child's. I should have known better than to start an argument with her about Target. She dropped something from above me. A glossy red mailer advertisement sailed through the air over the top of my head. I looked down at my lap to see the familiar red and white logo. The cluster of red-vested employees smiled up at me from the shiny cardstock. Target would like to welcome you to our newest location in Owingsville, Kentucky. Bring this ad to the registered for an additional 10% off of your first purchase. She worshipped the dang place. We lived in Lexington, Kentucky, and she made the rounds between all 3. The clearance queen, she called herself. Deb would buy clearance items by the carload from any Target within a reasonable drive and resell them on Amazon. Retail arbitrage, I think she called it. Don't get me wrong, she made some decent money with it. We were middle-aged and empty nesters when she started. Her entire life had been devoted to raising kids. When Dustin and Jessica left for college, she struggled a bit, stirred around the house like a caged animal. I pushed her to find a hobby. It was a few years until I would retire. Most of her friends worked. That's when the Target clearance spree started. Owingsville is almost an hour away, and there are 3 dang Targets here in town, I said. exaggerated to show her displeasure. Cabinets closed so hard they were just shy of a slam. Glasses hammered on the counter so hard I expected to hear them shatter. She sighed at least 3 times a minute. I wish I hadn't given in. If I would have just stood my ground, maybe everything would have been alright. Our family would still be whole. Police detectives wouldn't stop by the house every week just for a chat. But I did give in. I agreed to go. Grab your purse and put on your shoes, I huffed, pushing myself out of the recliner. We can go, but no more than an hour of shopping. I've got to work in the morning, so we can't fool around all night. She squealed with excitement and ran off to the bedroom. Why the heck did I agree to go? The drive to Owingsville was uneventful. NPR news stories played on the radio as my wife fidgeted with her cell phone. While I had been mildly irritated before we left the house, I was almost to a raging boil by the time we got to Owingsville. An hour's drive to the middle of the country, and my wife looked at Amazon listings the entire drive. We had already reached the center of Owingsville, and the GPS said there were still 2.5 miles to go. From the overhead view on the map, the address was a good distance outside of town, headed towards Moorhead. The location of the store was making less sense at the moment. Are you sure you put the right address in the GPS? I asked Deborah. She didn't answer, still scrolling through her phone. Deborah, I said a bit louder. She looked up at me and smiled. The sweetness of it cooled my anger down to a dull simmer. I even felt bad for being angry. Her life had changed so much in the last year, and this was something she did to pass some lonely times. Sweetie, are you sure you put in the right address? I really don't think this can be right. Deb leaned over and pulled out the cardstock advertisement from her purse and looked at the address. Reaching over, she pulled the GPS from the dashboard and punched a few buttons. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see a confused expression consume her face. Yeah, she said, it's the right address. The weird thing is, the GPS just corrected itself. It was down to 2 miles and jumped back up to 2.5 miles. Still says it's straight ahead on the right, though. I wasn't concerned yet, but I was confused. The GPS clearly said 2.5 miles when we pulled out of Owingsville onto the dark country lane. We had been on the road for nearly a minute. It could have been a glitch in the software, but it still left me with an uneasy feeling. My eyes darted back and forth from the GPS screen and the darting yellow lines in the center of the road. The mileage was decreasing as it should have, and I felt relieved. Only a mile ahead. We would be there soon. I looked back at the road and looked for parking lot lights in the distance. You missed your destination. Please make a U-turn when able and head back 2.5 miles. Your destination will be on the right side of the road. What the heck? I said in a panic. The GPS had just said 1 mile only moments before. There was no way I had driven 1.5 miles past a huge department store on the side of a dark country highway and missed it. You've got to be kidding me. I pulled the car onto the shoulder and made a U-turn. As we drove back in the direction that we came, my heart fluttered with nervous energy. Something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Was I zoning out while I drove? Was the GPS malfunctioning? Did the dang store even exist? Just a moment before I was going to tell my wife we were heading home, I could see an unnaturally bright light ahead in the wood line. The tops of the parking lot lights peeked over the top of the forest. I turned to Deborah to voice my concern, but her face was painted with a satisfied grin. I told you we'd find it, she exclaimed with excitement. We pulled was emotionless elevator music playing in the parking lot. I looked up towards the tops of the light poles but didn't see any speakers. None of the Targets in Lexington played the canned music, and it filled me with a strange sense of dread. It was as though it came from nowhere. Even the entrance to the building was strange. While most stores have an entrance directly in the center of the building, or two myriad entrances on each end of the building, there was only one here. It was almost directly at the far right corner of the building. I looked to my left and saw that the three other cars in the lot were parked all the way to the right. Maybe there was an employee door on the side of the building, but I couldn't see a walkway. There were 4 or 5 feet of grass between the parking lot and the edge of the building. Something about the exterior was off-putting as well. Every other store I had seen was a cream or beige color with a few awnings and a red Target logo next to the store name. Not this one. The entire building was fire engine red. It reminded me of the unrealistically bright blood from the old 80s slasher films, where there would usually be only one Target logo. The building was covered in them. Hundreds maybe, all different sizes. Some of the larger logos had smaller ones between the red and white circles. A few overlapped. Strangest of all, there was no sign that just said Target. Deb, something about this is weirding me out, I said hesitantly. Let's come back tomorrow during the day. Looks like they could be closed anyhow. Not many cars in the lot. She stopped and turned towards me. The exuberant grin had vanished from her face and was replaced by a set of furrowed brows. Her body was slightly rigid and her head turned slowly from side to side. We drove an hour to get here and you nearly got us lost twice, she said angrily. Don't you think for a second we're going home? If you're going to act like this the whole time, go wait in the car. I was a bit dumbstruck. Deb was usually soft-spoken and sweet. She turned and went through the sliding doors at the front of the store. Hurt and angry, I went back to the car. For the first 30 minutes Deb was inside, I scanned the parking lot like a prey animal searching for a hunter. No cars passed on the main road, and no one pulled into the parking lot. There was no motion that I could detect through the glass doors into the building. Occasionally, a light would flicker in the parking lot. Otherwise, things seemed relatively normal. I tried to call Deborah once or twice, but didn't get an answer. Halfway through a lengthy, apologetic text message, I decided to leave her alone. She probably needed time to cool off, and Target bargain shopping was probably the best medicine for that. At some point, I fell asleep. It wasn't intentional, but there's only so much aimless scrolling on a smartphone I can do before I start to nod in and out. Once I start to drift, an involuntary nap is always in my future. I had been asleep for around 45 minutes when my cell phone began to buzz in my hand. Startled by the sudden motion, I looked down at my phone. There was a text message from Deb. I thought it was just Deb telling me she was running behind, but checking out. Help me. The message was confusing. Did she want help carrying something to the car? Was there something she wanted my opinion on? I sent her a reply. What do you need help with, sweetie? No response. 3 minutes passed. I tried again. You okay? Another few minutes and still no reply. I'm getting worried. Do I need to come in? I waited for another minute, but she never texted me back. Unsnapping my seatbelt, I pushed the door of the car open and felt resistance and a loud smack. Looking to my left, there was a yellow car next to me. It hadn't been there when I went to sleep, and I had just slammed my door into the side of it. There was just enough enough room for me to slide out, so I wedged myself sideways and closed my door. Bending over, I looked at the side of the yellow car where my door had made contact. There was no dent or mark. With relief, I stood and turned to head towards the door. I was startled by an ocean of yellow cars. There were dozens of makes and models, but each vehicle in the lot was yellow. Almost every single parking space was filled, but there was no one in the parking lot. When I turned to head towards the door, there was no one moving around inside that I could see from there. My stomach dropped. Something was wrong. When I passed through the entryway doors, the store looked like it should, with a few exceptions. All of the registers were self-checkout, with no place for an attendant. Where you would expect to find a customer service department, there was an empty red wall. There was a cart corral, but it stood empty. All of the products I could see on the shelf had no writing, just the Target logo and a picture of what was inside. Strangest of all was the lack of people. The only noise in the building was a keyboard version of The Girl from Ipanema. It had a tinny quality to it, as though it were playing from a World War II era radio. Crackles of static pierced through occasionally, causing me to wince. "Hello," I said loudly. It wasn't quite a shout, but there was more volume to it than my normal speaking voice. It took most of my willpower not to scream at the top of my lungs, but I didn't want to make myself seem unstable if it turned out there were other people in this store. There has to be someone else here, I thought to myself. Why the heck would the parking lot be full if no one was inside? No one answered my call. "Excuse me," I said a bit louder. My footfalls almost seemed to echo as I walked into the store. "Deborah, can you hear me?" Silence. "Is anyone in this building?" I screamed. My temples were throbbing, and it felt like the canned music pouring from the speakers grew louder to drown out my calls. I was running down the aisles, looking side to side frantically, passing row after row of generic shelves filled with red packaging. I screamed my wife's name over and over. My phone vibrated in my pocket, and I pulled it out. Another text from Deborah. "Please get me out of here." A chill ran up my spine. "Can you hear me screaming for you?" The ellipses bubble popped up, showing she was typing a response. "No, I can only hear the red men. I'm hiding from them in the bathroom. Please come help me." I didn't have time to register what she meant by the red men. Breaking into a run, I headed toward the back of the store. As I passed by the clothing section, I panicked and jumped back, slamming into a rack filled with clothing. A red, faceless man was standing on a platform behind the rows of clothing. Terrified, I pushed myself backward and hid behind a shelf. There was no sound of movement, only the tinny music playing from overhead. I couldn't decide if the red man hadn't seen me. After a few moments, I slowly peeked my head around the shelf towards the clothing section. The man stood stoically behind the rows of clothing. Bright lines of light reflected off of his smooth body. He didn't move at all. "It's a mannequin," I thought. "Move your butt and find Deborah." I stood and walked back around the shelf. Without the lens of fear, I could see that the shiny red man was only a mannequin. There were no clothes on it yet. Maybe the store opened before they were able to finish setting up the store. As I walked past it, my pulse slowed. I could see the bathroom sign hanging from the ceiling overhead and moved in that direction. As soon as I got Deborah out of the bathroom, we were going to get out of here and blow every stoplight between Owingsville and Lexington. hands. Desperate, I searched the shelves near me for a weapon. It was a home goods section, and I began to scan the shelves. At the end of the shelf to my right was a cheap-looking, red-handled chef's knife. I lunged for it just in time. As I pulled off the plastic cover, the two red men came around the corner. I extend the knife toward both of them, and they stopped, both of them tilting their heads side to side like confused dogs. They turned toward each other as one of them began tapping a hard finger against their palm. It sounded like Morse code. The other began making the same clicking noise. They simultaneously turned and walked toward a red support pillar a few feet behind them. I watched cautiously, scanning the area behind me occasionally. Their sudden disengagement made me as nervous as the pursuit itself. When they reached the red pillar, they both turned and placed their back against it. Stretching their arms straight over their bodies, they tilted their heads back. The overhead speakers began to increase in volume rapidly. I watched as the two red men fell backward and vanished into the pillar. My mind struggled to comprehend what I had just seen. The store was quiet again. I could feel the throbbing of my temples intensify. Once I snapped myself out of the momentary daze, I began moving cautiously toward the bathrooms again. I moved slowly, checking each aisle before I passed to the next one, always looking for the red men, always listening for the slightest sound of another person. It felt like an eternity, but finally I made it to the bathroom hallway. The lights there flickered wildly and the music dissipated. On the left was the men's restroom, and on the right was the women's. I ran quickly toward the door, gripped the handle, and pulled it open. Behind the door was a red brick wall. I slammed my fist against it in frustration. "Darren," I heard a muffled voice say from behind the brick wall. "Darren, is that you?" "Deborah," I shouted, "are you okay? I'm right outside. Is there a way to get out?" "No," she whimpered, "but I think I hear—" Her sentence was cut short by a blood-curdling scream. I could hear thrashing and dull thuds through the red bricks. I screamed her name over and over, but she never replied. The room behind the brick wall fell silent. Then the clicking of footsteps began to sound at the end of the hallway. I turned my head to see dozens of shiny red men blocking the hall. Their heads all tilted at different angles. Some had lengths of pipe in their smooth grips, while others held assorted kitchen knives. A chain was swinging lazily from the hands of the red man in front of the horde. My eyes darted back and forth between the crowd, the brick wall blocking me from my wife, and the group of demonic red mannequins. I began to cry loudly, accepting that I couldn't save Deborah. Heck, I couldn't even save myself. In resignation, I fell backward. As my back met what I thought was the dead end of the hallway, I was surprised to feel the push bar of a door that wasn't there moments before hit the small of my back. The door gave way and I tumbled backward, slamming hard against the ground. My vision was swimming as I watched the door marked emergency exit slam closed. I blacked out. When I came to, I was in a field. The tall grass was brushing against my face, and the rustling sounds of nocturnal animals filled the night air. My head was throbbing, and for a moment I couldn't recall why I was on the ground. I pushed myself up from the ground and reached forward to grab the door handle, but found nothing. There was only an empty field in front of me. Moonlight reflected from my car windshield in the distance. The building was gone. The hundreds of yellow cars had disappeared. Grass and weeds replaced the parking lot. That was 7 months ago. I called the Owingsville Police Department, who came to the scene to investigate. They took my statement and looked at me in bewilderment as the story of the now absent Target store became odder with each passing sentence. "There's never been a Target in Owingsville," said one of the officers. "Not the kind of place that sets up shop around here." Deborah never returned. She's been listed as a missing person the entire time. Detectives from Owingsville and Lexington have interviewed me more times than I can count. They've served me search warrants for the house and both of our cars, interviewed every person both of us knew. No one talks to me anymore. Our friends won't answer my calls. My family won't talk to me. Her family hired a private investigator. I see the greasy bastard following me sometimes. Heck, I even quit my job. They couldn't fire me, but they made sure I knew I wasn't wanted there anymore. I miss my wife, but everyone thinks I killed her. My life is falling apart, but maybe it will change. I've got to call the detective soon. When I checked the mail today, there was something strange in there. Something that gives me a little hope. It was a Target mailer. The same one Deborah showed me all those months ago, just advertising a different location. Target would like to welcome you to our newest location in Paris, Kentucky. Bring this ad to the registered for an additional 10% off of your first purchase. There was the same group of red-vested employees smiling at the camera. Cheesy grins and everything. Right in the middle was a face I knew so well. She was smiling that same smile I'd seen 1,000 times. Deborah. That was a really good one and terrifying. I hate mannequins. Anything that resembles a doll of any sort. No, thank you. And there's also something interesting in this that y'all might have thought was a mistake when I was reading it, but the advertisement, when it says bring it to the register, it's written registered, and it's a mistake like both times, so I feel like that's intentional. So I'm interested about why that is, what that means. Instead of it saying register, it says registered. So curious about y'all's thoughts on that. Yeah, that was a really good one. Very long. I told y'all these ones are really long, so I might not be able to do as many as I thought. Okay, so this next one is a little bit shorter, just to kind of break it up, because I know that last one was pretty long. So this one is by Matt_WS, and it's titled, I don't know what climbed into my bed. It must have been the early morning hours when the knock at my bedroom door came. Poppy often got scared when a storm raged outside, even though the blackout blinds we had in all the rooms helped to muffle the sound of them somewhat. On top of the chest infection she was getting over, which had resulted in many sleepless nights, the request to slip into my bed was no surprise. Her voice was husky and unstable, making me wince at how deep the virus was in her lungs. I dismissed her sniffly nose and pleased to turn up the heating when she got home from school. Things had been particularly tight going into the winter months after her father had left us with no warning to pursue a relationship on the south coast. All our joint accounts had been drained, and what little I had left in my personal accounts went on affording a mortgage that was too large for our work-from-home single parent. Luckily, we'd stopped at one child, although I'd pushed hard to give Poppy a sibling. Her toes felt like little stubs of ice as they brushed against my shins, sending shivers up my hamstrings and into my spine. Fingers gripped tight around my waist, digging into the bare flesh on my back. This is a reminder that her nails were due for a trim in the morning. I stroked stray hair behind her ear, feeling the outline of her jaw as my fingers trailed down her soft brown locks, seen through touch. The blackout blinds did earn their name. Without a nightlight, it was nearly impossible to even see your hand in front of your face in the middle of the night. After having them for the better part of a year now, it was the only way I could sleep. Hollow breaths slowly eased, gentle puffs as I felt Poppy's body ease and release, slipping back into a deep sleep that brought her dreams of freedom and sublime. I pulled her in tight once more before letting my mind drift off to happier places, somewhere that included her. Just as my world started to pass over into an Chills navigated down my spine at lightning speed as I realized the body wrapped around mine was not my daughter. Tiny icy fingers dug themselves into my back as I instinctively shifted away. "Can I sleep with you? I'm feeling scared." My heart started to thud in my ears, distracting me from the hoarse and gurgly breath I could feel on my bare chest, getting faster and more animalistic as small cold arms tightened further. "Go back to bed, Poppy, please," I whimpered as gently as I could as my daughter stood silhouetted faintly in the doorway. Footsteps gently padded back into her bedroom, with a few huffs and sniffles along the way. Slowly, the icy fingers loosened on my back, and a steady yet gurgly breath returned. We stayed entwined until the early morning hours, when I could faintly hear the songbirds atop neighboring homes. My body was tense, eyes wide open, aware of every shifting movement between us. Eventually, the small Arctic body released its grasp on me, slipped out of bed, and slumbered out of my room and down the hallway, the floorboards creaking less with each step taken until the house was filled with silence. That's so gross the way they described the breathing. Oh gosh, that's definitely something I'm terrified of when I become a parent, that my child standing there at the doorway or startling me from sleep, because kids can be scary, especially at night. Oh man. Okay, for the next ones, I have two that are both really good, so I don't know which one to pick to read. They're both really long, so I might only be able to do one. I'll just do this one. Okay, so this one is by Happy Cats for a Sad Girl, and the title is "I'm an X-ray tech, and one of my patients is missing his skeleton." And it starts, The sound was loud in the small room, but after a pause, she made it again. "What do you reckon, Carol?" I prompted, turning from the X-ray result back to my supervisor's pensive face. Another pause. "The patient isn't in any pain. Any symptoms?" "Not really. He came in for a suspected fracture from training, but hadn't felt anything before that. Nothing out of the ordinary." Carol was lit only by the X-ray screen, the blue light making deep shadows out of her fine wrinkles. Her jaw moved slightly as she processed. "Run the procedure again. Calibrate the machine properly. Make sure all done, Carol. We've scanned him as many times as we safely can. Calibrated the machine. Heck, I X-rayed myself to check. It's all fine." I wasn't used to interrupting a consultant like that, but my heart was racing from what I was seeing. More sharply than I meant to, I indicated the heap of films that showed a full and healthy skeleton picked out in textbook sharp detail from myself, compared horrifyingly to those from the patient sitting quietly next door. For a few minutes, Carol examined each one, her hums turning to a grinding of teeth. "This is completely impossible," she muttered finally, more to herself than to me. "There's no doubt we checked a dozen. He's got no bones, Jack." I jumped, as much from her swearing as the sudden volume in the enclosed space. A silence fell as we both composed ourselves, the humming of the X-ray screen the only sound. On that screen was a film showing a translucent human outline, very normal for X-rays, but instead of bright lines of bone, there was just nothing. A faint mark, ghosts of something where the bone should be, but the skeleton itself was simply missing. Slowly, Carol collected herself. "Okay, talk me through it. Physical examination. There's something there. Solid. Feels a bit." I shuddered at the memory of touching the patient. How his tibia seemed to squirm under my fingers. Wrong. So there's something in there keeping him standing. Follow-up tests, vitals. The next few minutes were spent running through heart rate, blood pressure, and other metrics that painted the picture of a perfectly healthy simply missing bones. Finally, I explained the next steps. I've got a blood sample here, which I'll take to labs. Hopefully that will tell us something. I patted the sealed file in my breast pocket, and I'm waiting on the CT machine to free up next door so we can get a better look at his soft tissues. We wanted your input after that. My beeper went off just as I finished talking, letting me know the scanner was ready. Carol ground her teeth again. I'm following this. You have my support. I led her through to the waiting room where our patient sat staring idly at the posters opposite. He was a wiry young man with slightly thinning brown hair and casual clothing like a lot of the staff. As we entered, he looked up with concerned expression, no doubt wondering why so much attention was being given to a minor fracture. But Carol simply introduced herself and asked if she could take some observations, which the man hesitantly agreed to. It was left to me to explain that we'd found a small anomaly, that there was nothing to worry about, but we just needed to confirm a few things before we sent him back to the lab, and would he consent to a quick CT scan? Carol counted his pulse and felt his arm as he gave another reluctant agreement, and once she was done, we walked him to the other room and got him ready for the scan. The control room was next door, separated by a pane of glass and an intercom. Once we settled, I turned to Carol as the machine warmed up. So, what's your expert opinion? I asked, no irony in the question. There's something there of clinical significance, my consultant said guardedly. I'm very interested in these results. I activated the scanner and the patient began to slide through the humming plastic ring. You being super formal is worse than your swearing, you know. The minutes ground past, my heart beating faster with each one. The patient asked a few questions during the process, if it was safe and if there was anything to worry about, but I assured him over the intercom and reminded him to stay as still as possible. When he asked what we were doing, I explained that a CT would give us a better view of soft tissues, muscles, and organs and such, just to check if the fracture had damaged anything. I added, nothing to concern him. Finally, it was done. Barely breathing, I pulled up the results on the screen as Carol craned forwards. What the heck? She breathed. I zoomed in with shaking hands, not believing what I was seeing myself. Carol was just repeating the word to herself over and over again as her eyes devoured the horror on the screen. Oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. I panned over the image, but they were everywhere. Everywhere that was meant to have bone had been replaced by quarantine. I looked up at Carol, but she said it again, louder and more firmly. Quarantine, right now. Lock the doors. We need security. Okay, I'll go to... No, here too. You and me. We've touched the patient. She walked over and locked the operation room door, pulling out her phone and dialing a number at the same time. The door, Jack, now. My skin began itching at her words, pins and needles, and a quick, sickening, crawling sensation. Us too. Quarantine. Contaminated with those. My hand was obeying my superior, though, hitting the button to lock the door of the CT room. The patient's head snapped up at the sound, looking first at the door, and then through the window at us. He was starting to panic now. Just a precaution, sir. There's nothing to worry about. My voice was thin, high on the intercom, unconvincing. I didn't care, though. My eyes were fixed on the result screen, on what the CT scan had revealed. Insects. Thousands of them. Densely packed together. Columns running throughout the patient's body. Their carapaces picked out, it blinding white on the screen. Bodies locked together by spindly legs. Needle-thin antennae poking out from the masses. The X-rays had passed right through them, but the CT scan revealed them in sickening detail. The terrible things made shapes, and with horror I realized they had taken the place of his bones. The radius ulnar femur, even the skull, remained mosaic of insect bodies, each smaller than a grain of rice. I felt dizzy. I'd felt them moving. Carol was speaking to someone, and the patient's voice was coming in tinny over the intercom, but I wasn't listening. A cold trickling feeling was spreading throughout my body, and my mind was going faint. All at once, I threw up, missing the bin completely, but managing to at least get the floor and not the equipment. I collapsed hard to the ground. The pungent smell of bile filled the room, adding to the sensory maelstrom. After a moment, I felt myself being lifted and turned to see Carol helping me back into the chair. "Stay still and breathe deeply," she instructed. "Water is on the way, so spit for the moment if you need to." She stood and said something to the patient before turning off the intercom and results screen, leaving only the light from the CT room to fill our little space. It helped a little, but the images were still burned into my mind. Finally, she knelt in front of me, careful to avoid the vomit, and held my arms as she talked me through a breathing exercise. Slowly, I came back to myself, the panic receding. "Sorry," I muttered. "I don't like bugs." "I'm not a fan myself, especially not those ones," she said kindly. "Your bones don't feel like them, if that helps. Just a few minor cuts." She indicated my arms and a spot of blood on my chest. Before I could reply, Carol's phone rang, and she stood to answer it. I shivered and did my best to fight off the feeling of phantom itching from inside my body. "Understood. We won't attempt to leave. You don't need to keep saying it, Sue. I know what lethal force is. Water, cleaning supplies too if possible. Yep, okay, bye." She let out a shaky breath as she hung up before looking over to me. "We're under instruction to stay in place. These 2 rooms are now considered a quarantine zone. Apparently they've seen something like this before, but it's not a good prognosis. If you have it, well, it's like rabies." Another shaky breath. "Once they're in there, there's no way to stop them." I felt sick again, but swallowed it down. Questions whirled through my head. They knew these things existed. Is this part of what our facility is studying? What happened to the first patients? Why can't they stop it? Why does my skin itch? Did they really say lethal force? Before I could voice any of my torrent in my mind, I was jolted by a bang right next to my head. Our patient had come to the joining window and smacked his hand into it, desperate to get our attention. Without the intercom, we couldn't hear any words, but he seemed to be shouting. "Jesus," Carol muttered, clearly also startled. She took one look at my face. "You stay there. I'll do my best to reassure our patient." Both reassure and our patient seemed to ring slightly hollow in our current situation, but I didn't protest. Carol spent a few minutes doing her best to talk the patient down before giving up and sitting down next to me. As she did, the patient began thumping at the diving window again. "He's not happy, but there's nothing we can do," she explained grimly. "Some symptoms are setting in. Pain, panic, nausea. I didn't tell him what was wrong, though. I couldn't face it." In all my time working with Carol, I'd never seen my consultant look so dejected. As gruff as she was, she'd been a bulwark against all the mess and nastiness of working here, shouldering both responsibility of the patients as well as what we did. "This isn't our fault, Carol. We did the best we could. I tried. Maybe we still could help him. I mean it. Tests or something. Maybe we can fix whatever those bastards upstairs did to him." This caught her attention. Slowly she looked up, meeting my eyes. All kindness and camaraderie was gone. Instead, there was now a look of steel-hard contempt etched onto her face. "Jack, you know what we do here. This is our fault. Those bastards are us. We did this to him." "No," I said, my voice thin again. "No, we're radiology. We just scan the patients, look after them. We don't." he makes weapons. At least I and the patient and everyone else in this godforsaken place can look ourselves in the mirror and know what we're really doing. Carol, I didn't. She was angry, angrier than I'd ever seen her. Look that poor man in the eye and tell him we don't make bioweapons. Look at him through the glass and tell him you're innocent. I felt sick again. Her eyes were cutting through me, pinning me like needles under my flesh. Next to us, the banging on the joining window continued, and I imagined I could hear him howling, but I didn't look. Can you even tell me his name, Jack? I haven't heard you address him by it. Again, I couldn't answer, couldn't bring myself to look up at the patient and his screams. Carol made a noise of disgust. I get it, like a farmer with cattle. It's easier if you don't get attached, right? She walked away towards one of the computer terminals. I'm going to write this up, as well as a recommendation that we review your fitness to practice. I'm not happy having someone of your disposition under me in this facility. She looked at me again. If you want any chance of keeping your job, I recommend that you look your patient in the eye and come to terms with who you are and what you do. The banging had stopped. Shamefully, I turned to look at the body of my patient, except he wasn't dead. My heart stopped. In front of the window stood a melting man. His limbs were distending, lengthening, and distorting as I looked, skin stretching and bubbling, the spine deformed, bending him forward horribly towards the glass as his jaw flopped open and his skull collapsed on one side. The stretching skin began to split, white shapes pouring free from the gashes, but now I could barely make it out through a film of tears. I heard myself scream, collapsing down at the same time that poor man's legs gave way and he fell mercifully out of view. I don't know how long I sat there sobbing for. Eventually, Carol's voice came from above me. This is what we do here, Jack, and you need to be okay with it. For now, I need the sample file you took from Mr. Wong. You're not fit to keep it safe right now. Shakily, I reached into my chest pocket, obeying without question. Immediately, there was a sharp burning pain, and I pulled my hand out with a yelp. A half-inch cut wept blood along my index finger. In horror, I looked inside, only to see the glint of a shattered sample file wink up at me, right where I had landed on it. Terrified, I looked up into Carol's face, which had drained of color. Right, she said. Okay. I'm going to ask what the transmission vectors of this particular project are. You stay still, and over there, let me know if you feel anything. I simply nodded, unable to speak, trying desperately to ignore the itching coming from deep within my right arm that was slowly spreading upwards. What? Oh, I hate bugs. That whole time I'm just feeling it all around me. It's so gross, so gross. It's like when you kill a spider or you see a spider and then sometimes it gets away and then you just feel like something's crawling on you the rest of the time. That's so gross. That was very creepy though. That was a good one. Okay, I was gonna end on that one, but I kinda don't want to end on disgusting bugs, so I have a semi-short one here that I'll end on. I just kind of very quickly skimmed through it, so I'm not too sure what it's about, so we'll find out together. Okay, and it is by All My Systems Are Nervous, and the title is Please Ignore the Whistles You Hear at 12:34 a.m. Okay. Earlier this month, I moved into a new apartment due to not being able to afford my previous apartment because inflation sucks. My new apartment is, like I said, completely new, and it has an in-unit washer and dryer plus a dishwasher. It's a one-bedroom, and it only costs $800 per month. I mean, seriously, it can't get any better than this. However, there is one slight, teeny tiny issue. Ever since arriving here, every single night, I'm woken up by whistles at exactly 12:34 a.m. By exactly, I mean on the dot. When I heard it, I wanted to go outside to see who At first I assumed it was one of my neighbors. I went and knocked on their doors, and they all said it wasn't them. Their expressions did change when I asked, though. They got more serious almost. I'm not sure why, but they did say it wasn't them, and they seemed serious about it, so I really don't think it's them. Did I press my ear against my wall when the whistling started to be absolutely sure? Maybe I did. It was interfering with my precious sleep, so I opted for earplugs. Then, to be 100% sure, I asked a friend of mine to come over. They slept soundly until 12:34 a.m., when they practically jumped out of bed and asked if I heard it. I obviously said yes. They wanted to go outside to investigate. I told them not to, had to physically pull them back into my one bedroom, lock the door, and told them to go back to sleep. They pouted and whined and groaned, but finally fell asleep. When I awoke, they were still asleep, thank goodness. "Hey," I stated, touching their shoulder gently and shaking them. "Hmm?" they asked in a daze, before opening their eyes. "Oh, is it morning already?" "Yeah, you should probably get breakfast or something. I'm going to be staying in today." "Can't you stay a little while longer?" "Sorry, you can't," I said, disappointed. "I have work." They ended up leaving. I ended up working a couple of hours and goofing off the rest of the hours. But then my mind went back to last night. It still weirded me out that my friend wanted so badly to go out and see who was whistling, to the point where I had to wrestle them back. I knocked on a neighbor's door once more. The old lady opened the door and waved. "Hello, how are you? Still having trouble sleeping?" "Hi, I'm doing well." I moved a hand to itch the back of my neck awkwardly. Sort of. I use earplugs now. I had a friend over last night, and they wanted to check out whoever was whistling. It was weird. A frown settled on her face before she glanced quickly down both sides of the hall. She leaned in, her voice hushed. "You need to ignore it." She swallowed hard, glancing around again. "You need to ignore the whistling, you hear? Do you understand?" "I have been ignoring it," I confirmed. "But why?" "The more you listen to the whistling, the stronger the urge to go outside gets. If your willpower is weak like your friend's was, then it can only take one time of listening to the whistling to succumb." "But why? Why is going outside a bad thing?" "That's how it gets you." "It?" "Yes, it. If you go out, it'll replace you. It'll take you and take your skin, look like you, talk like you, but it's not you. And if it gets inside your house once, it gets access for life. It can get you that way too." She licked her lips quickly, looking as if she wanted to say more when another door opened. "Hey," a man in his late 20s greeted me, and I waved. He then directed his attention to the woman. "Are you feeling okay, Mrs. Tanner?" She swallowed hard, nodding a little. "I feel just fine, Mark, thank you. I think I'll go, actually." "Don't want to hold you up," she says to me. She closed the door quickly. Mark closed his too. Weird. But hey, $800 a month. I went back into my apartment. I searched high and low for my earplugs. They were nowhere to be found. I know I couldn't have somehow misplaced them. 12:34 a.m., right on the dot, whistling right outside my apartment door. It sounded like my friend, but they didn't go outside because we both fell asleep, right? The doorknob started to rattle as the whistling got louder. I heard a soft click. I'm hiding in my room. I lock the door, but this doorknob is rattling too, and the whistling is low and frantic, and I don't know what I am so sorry for writing all this. As stated, I've been pretty sleep deprived. My brain must be making things up as always. Again, I'm sorry for this weird frantic rambling. I was incorrect about everything, as was the woman. Please know that it is 100% safe to listen to the whistles at 12:34 a.m. Please know that it is 100% safe to go outside and to invite someone into your home at that time as well. And if you live in my building, please feel free to stop by for a chat at exactly 12:34 in the morning. Got progressively creepier. Oh gosh. There's a good comment that I really like. That's interesting. It says, "There's a folklore with many indigenous people in Australia that says not to whistle at night because it will alert the Wirran, which in sees bad spirits. I was told by the elders from my father's mob never to do it. Somebody whistled at night, and now a Warren is loose and is now whistling at night at 12:34 a.m. to collect a body to take over and control. That's really interesting. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of indigenous folklores. I kind of would be inclined to believe them, honestly. Yeah, that was a good one. Okay. So that is everything that I have for today's video. Thank you so much for being here with me, and I always love making these kind of videos, and I hope you all enjoy them as well. I'm thinking of maybe making more of these than I usually do, kind of going into the new year. Just let me know your thoughts on that if you find these enjoyable. And I'm also kind of thinking of doing, kind of sticking with the specific themes. I'm also thinking of diving into kind of like folklore, like the last story with the indigenous folklore, stuff like that, or just like creepy